On March 27, 2014, 21-year-old French student Sophie Collombet was raped and bludgeoned to death in Kurilpa Point Park in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. She had been on her way home from a 3-hour lecture at Griffith University, where she was studying her Master's of Business. On April 7th, Australian citizen Benjamin James Millward from Ipswich, Queensland was arrested and charged with her murder and rape. He was given a life sentence for the murder and rape on October 25, 2016, at the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane. He had been using the illegal drug ice at the time of her murder. The case attracted adverse commentary about Australian society, as Collombet was believed to be still alive when Millward left her. A number of people had walked past her naked body, which was covered with newspapers and Millward's jacket, but took no action, believing her to be a homeless person, many of whom slept in that area. It was a homeless person who eventually checked on Collombet and found no pulse. CPR was attempted without success. Police were also criticized for failing to make the Kurilpa Point Park a safe place despite a number of recent crimes reported there. The park is beside the Brisbane River, immediately between the busy William Jolly Bridge and the Gallery of Modern Art at the northern end of the Queensland Cultural Precinct. A popular riverbank walking/cycling track passes through the park. Benjamin James Millward has been jailed for life for the rape and murder of French student Sophie Collombet, whose body was found in an inner-city Brisbane rotunda in 2014. Millward, who pleaded guilty to the charges in Brisbane Supreme Court earlier this month, attacked the 21-year-old business student in South Brisbane on March 27, 2014. Ms. Collombet was on her way home after a night class at Griffith University. Her naked and battered body was found the next morning in a rotunda at Kurilpa Park. Sophie Collombet's body was found near the William Jolly Bridge at South Brisbane. In the Supreme Court of Brisbane, Justice and Lyons sentenced 28-year-old Millward to 15 years for rape, to be served concurrently with the life sentence for murder. "You attacked a defenseless woman. You showed her no respect," Justice Lyons said. "You treated her appallingly and then left her. You abandoned a severely injured woman. Your actions simply defy belief." Justice Lyons said Millward had a criminal history of violence and burglary offenses, but no previous sexual offenses. The court heard Millward was on ice and living at a nearby homeless men's shelter at the time. Millward jailed for rape, murder of French student. Justice Lyons said his drinking and drug-taking was no excuse for what he did. She said Ms. Collombet was a young woman with a life ahead of her, a life full of hopes and dreams. "You ended all that. This young woman died at your hands. You have caused her death," she said. "You allowed your sexual desires to overwhelm you. Your actions were cowardly." The court heard Ms. Collombet survive for several hours after the brutal attack, with prosecutor Todd Fuller saying she had 128 external injuries, including skull fractures. Collombet family thanks Australian people for support. Ms. Collombet's family traveled from France for today's sentencing and wept in court as victim impact statements were read out, detailing the loss they felt since her death. Her brother, Guillaume Collombet, spoke outside court through an interpreter. "Sophie was an extraordinary person. She brought joy wherever she went and everybody loved her," the interpreter said. Benjamin Millward pleaded guilty to the charges. The day they learned of Sophie's demise, the world collapsed around them and has never been the same since, because of the crazy act of one person. He said the family had been completely overwhelmed by the support and warmth shown by the Australian people, particularly those in Brisbane. "This is why they've wanted to come to Australia, all together as a family, so they could collectively say thank you to all," he said. The interpreter said the family had received a tremendous number of letters and flowers from strangers. He expressed their thanks to Queensland police and staff and students at Griffith University. They also want to thank the Aboriginal community for what they did for Sophie in terms of acknowledging her passing by the ceremony they conducted for Sophie. He said, "While nothing can fill that void, it's appeasing for them to know that there is still beautiful people in the world." Millward's defense lawyer said his client was sorry for what he had done, and he had written a letter to Ms. Collombet's family to express his remorse. During today's hearing, Millward often slumped his head in the dock and was tearing up. The court heard Millward could only remember some of his actions, but told police when arrested, "What I've done is horrible." Millward will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years. In April 2014, more than 2,000 people gathered in Brisbane for a march and candlelight vigil in memory of Ms. Collombet. The march commenced at King George Square in front of Brisbane City Hall with speeches, and then proceeded to the Kurilpa Point Park where the candlelight vigil was held. The organizers of the march said one of the purposes of the march was to show that Brisbane cares about violence against women. There was also criticism of the location of a Catholic Ozcare hostel for homeless men and those recently paroled from prison for offenses including murder and rape as being too close to Brisbane's major cultural precinct. Millward had been living at the hostel, but had failed to return by the curfew on the night of the murder. He had obtained the drug ice, which fueled his attack on Collombet from another resident of the hostel. Sophie Collombet was buried in her hometown of Saint Julien-Mont-Denis, a commune in the Savoy department in the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region in southeastern France. Her funeral was a large event where 1,200 villagers took part in a grand funeral procession behind her casket with a 120-piece brass band playing Chopin's mournful Marche Funèbre funeral march.